today, but let's talk about the intelligence report that has surfaced and the circumstantial evidence that they put in there saying that this is how we know it was the Russians.
Well, I've read that entire 25-page report multiple times, and half of it is laughable. It is absurd beyond belief. For example, they're expecting us to believe that the Russian intelligence services are foolish enough to leave the Russian language in the code, to leave the date and time stamp that the program was compiled, to use a Cyrillic keyboard, which could be detected by forensic science, and lastly, to have an IP address that points back to the Russian Kremlin. Seriously, imagine what would happen here in America if the CIA were to hack Russia, and we left the IP address of the programmer on the second floor of the CIA offices.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Did they find the name, rank, and serial number of the KGB officer that?
That's about the only thing it didn't find.
Yeah.
So in all sincerity, this, and they also claim that this is the type of software that the Russians use. Well, unfortunately, it's a type of software that hundreds of thousands of hackers also use. Once a piece of software is out there, it gets onto the dark web and everybody's using it. So the way that this was done and the lack of sophistication suggests a 15-year-old boy or an 18-year-old somewhere who's bored in their bedroom at night going, let's see if I can hack into the DNC. And with that software, of course, they could. The DNC was not protected either physically or by education because it was a simple phishing technique that got them in, meaning somebody opened an email and clicked a link from someone they did not know.
Yeah.
I mean, how bizarre, how absurd. So it cannot possibly have been a nation state, let alone the Russian nation state. They are way too sophisticated to make that many mistakes.
And if they were that unsophisticated, we really wouldn't have anything to worry about with the Russians, would we? And yet they're far more sophisticated than that report would indicate. So we do have things to be concerned about, but not that.
It's absurd beyond belief, absurd beyond belief. Plus, the software that was used is a year and a half old and has had many updates since that time. So in all sincerity, do you think the Russians spent all of this time updating and fixing their bugs and then decided to use a software piece that was a year and a half old? No. Everything points to a teenager or a very unsophisticated hacker.
Yeah, and of course, there's two different issues here. There's the Podesta emails, which were a phishing attack, and then there's also the DNC data, which we've had a former British ambassador say, hey, I traveled to the United States, and that information was handed to me in a park. And we had the current British ambassador saying, I had some people tell me when I was in Washington that they were involved in turning that information over. So that looks like, if you want to believe the British ambassadors, of course, they don't even talk about that. They don't give that any credibility in the mainstream media. But if you believe those British ambassadors, that wasn't even a hack. It wasn't even a phishing attack.
It could very easily have been an inside job.
Yeah.
We do not know. Here's the thing. If a hacker organization is smart enough, technologically competent enough, which we must assume the Russian government is, just like we are, then there is simply no way to trace that back. Even though in the report, there's a sentence in the report that says it is extremely difficult to find attribution for any hack, but not impossible. Mm-hmm. And then they go on to say, we know what specific tools people use. We know how they act. Well, good Lord, that's how all hackers act. And all hackers use the same tools.
Absolutely.
I mean, either are, without disrespecting our intelligence services, they are either naive or they are purposely deceiving us, one or the other.
Well, a dog that hasn't barked here, of course, in the mainstream media is the fact that Hillary Clinton did disrespect our intelligence services when she put secret and above top secret emails and communications on her server that was not secure, that was easily hacked. And we know for a fact, if they're going to tell us that the Russians went in and got information about John Podesta's emails, do you think they would get it from Hillary Clinton's emails? And yet they don't ever make that connection when they're talking about it. That's a dead giveaway that this is all about politics, isn't it?
Of course it's about politics. And of course this is politically motivated. And anybody could see this if they look through the smoke and mirrors that the intelligence service is giving us. It's a trivial thing for us, especially any cybersecurity specialist will see the holes in this system.
I want to ask you about the way that they're presenting this. And of course, the language is everything. They'll go out and talk about how the Russians hacked our election, but then they are not very specific about that. When you go down and look at what they're actually saying, when they say the Russians, quote unquote, hacked our election, they're not saying that the Russians got into our electronic voting machines or any of the tabulating areas. What they're saying is that the Russians released true information about Hillary Clinton and the DNC and John Podesta that cost her the election when we found out what she was about. But, John, when they talk about hacking the election, I believe, I want to get your comments on this. Do you see it this way? I think they're creating a problem and creating an image in the minds of the American public that what was involved here was Russians actually getting into our voting machines, because then the follow-up that they did to this was Jay Johnson unilaterally declaring, hey, we're going to get involved directly into the elections, even after it surfaced that Homeland Security had tried to hack into multiple state Board of Elections computers. So they were the hackers trying to get into the computers, and now they're saying, hey, and we're going to do that. We're going to use this as an excuse. Aren't they subtly creating a psychological problem in the minds of people that they're not technically saying exists, and then using that to insert themselves into our electronic voting machines in the future elections?
Well, that's entirely possible, but I think the motive behind what's happening now is, you notice that as soon as we started pointing fingers at Russia as trying to manipulate our elections, nobody's paying any attention to the actual emails anymore.
That's right.
Because isn't that the real problem?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that what this is truly about? Misconduct that no one's paying any attention to now, because we have a misdirection going, oh, there's something far more important than this misconduct. And that is the fact that it was the Russians that told us about it. Please, wake up, America. Wake the F up.